First question is concept of ideal types and its limitations. You have to start with the definition. What do you mean by ideal types? Ideal types are the regularities which is seen in society. Regularities means the regularly seen elements. Okay. See, the question is actually ideal types and its limitations, but the second part is missing here. You haven't written about the limitations. Okay, the only first part will be evaluated here. So, and in the first part also you can actually add examples. You haven't mentioned any examples. Weber is talking about ideal types of social action, right? That 4 actions, emotion, affective actions, like rational action, vote rational action, traditional action. You can write that. Weber is also talking about ideal types of authority, that traditional authority, charismatic authority, rational legal authority, that you can write. These two compulsorily you can write. You have options. Like capitalism, you can write ideal types of capitalism, ideal type of Protestant ethic. All these things you can write here. Okay, but at least social action or authority should have been mentioned. One example should be there. Then the problem with this answer is actually there is no limitation. Okay, so out of 10 hardly you'll get 3 marks. Second one, class in itself and class 4 itself. Okay, see here also you have to start with the definition. What do you mean by class? What Marx says, class is actually the person's position in the production process. So if you are occupied, if you are engaged in a production process, what is your role? That is what you mean by class. And then this is actually an objective criteria. It is a simple definition of class, and based on objective criteria, that is what you understood as class in itself. This part is correct, but the first part is actually missing. So it is based on objective criteria. Class in itself. Class in itself is basically person's position in the production process. Then what you have written here is class in itself is based on false consciousness and class 4 itself is based on true consciousness. That is not correct. In class in itself, when we are talking about, there is no consciousness involved. It is just what is class. It is based on objective criteria. So class is actually the class in itself. Okay. But when it comes to class 4 itself, it is a subjective criteria. So there is some consciousness is involved. Okay. Now we have understood different stages in terms of primitive communism, ancient mode of production, feudal mode of production, capitalism, socialism, and communism. Now what we have discussed, what is actually happening in ancient mode of production when the slaves revolt against masters. They are not able to change their situation. Erstwhile slaves becoming the serfs and erstwhile slaves becoming the lords. So actually they are not changing the condition, only the mode of production has changed. So that is actually based on false consciousness. Okay, even though there is a revolution, that is based on false consciousness. In the revolt which happens at the feudal mode of production, that revolution is also based on false consciousness. But in both cases there is a consciousness. Because of consciousness only revolution is there. But in these two cases it is false consciousness. Only in capitalism the revolution is becoming and based on true consciousness. So you can't say class 4 itself is based on true consciousness. People are aware about their common problem. It can also be based on false as well as true consciousness. Okay, but when consciousness is there, it is class 4 itself. Because you have written here class in itself to class 4 itself is a fundamental prerequisite of social change. That is correct. But that true consciousness part is actually wrong. You have written here, they have, when it comes to subjective criteria, they have gained true consciousness. It can be both. In ancient mode of production, it is false consciousness. In feudal mode of production, it is false consciousness. Only in capitalist mode of production, it is based on true consciousness. Workers are aware about their common problem. They unite with the appropriate system of ideology. There is a proper leadership and proper organization. All is there. So that is based on true consciousness. They were able to change their situation. Okay. At the moving equilibrium. This is actually a very good answer. What you have written is correct, but what you can do is this is having very limited content, right? Moving equilibrium, you know, one part of that social system. So you can even define social system. Then you can say there are 2 stages in the social system theory, right? Mechanism equilibrium phase and requisite functionalism phase. And in mechanism equilibrium phase, he is actually giving the concept of moving equilibrium. And then you talked about all the specific mechanism, fulfilling the needs and maintaining equilibrium. When there is a change, the feedback is coming and restoring the equilibrium, and all those things is written here. Finally, you can also talk about the cybernetic hierarchy of control. If that is also there, it could have been a better answer. Okay, so now you may get around 5-6 marks. If you have written a cybernetic hierarchy of control, you may get 1 more mark. Okay. But this okay, otherwise also this one is written well. Sacred and profane. See, actually, sacred and profane is discussed under the theory of religion, right? So basically, you should have started with the definition of religion. Durkheim defined religion as a system of unified system of beliefs and practices, which are related to sacred things. So he is directly saying it is related to sacred things. And what do you mean by sacred is also coming as part of the definition. Religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices which are related to sacred things. That is to say, things set apart and forbidden. So what all things which are set apart and forbidden are what you mean by sacred. Okay, so that should have been here. And then you can basically explain that definition and the answer is ready. Then you can talk about the beliefs as defining the sacred, beliefs and practice actually defining the sacred. There are beliefs are in the form of certain rituals and practices, and there are negative rites, positive rites. Negative rites you are understood in terms of fasting, sacrifices, etc. Positive rites you understood in terms of worshipping. Positive rites means basically reducing the distance between God and the individual. Negative rites is actually increasing the distance, like fasting, etc. Everything else is profane. Okay, so you can talk about examples. You can even write example. I can't see any example here. They are both are mutually exclusive. That is there. See, the idol in a temple, that is considered as sacred, which is supernatural, right? It is like it is considered as sacred. It is something which is set apart and forbidden. But the pipe which you can see in the temple, that is profane. So basically everything apart from sacred is profane. That is there, but you could have started with definition. Then it would have been a matured answer. You'll get 4 marks. Organic and mechanic solidarity. Division of labor. Yeah, it's a very good answer. You have written about organic solidarity, mechanical solidarity. Okay, every dimension is covered. But you should have mentioned the diagram, the time scale, which I have already told you, right? In the class I have given you the time scale, that this diagram could have been there. With time, the mechanical solidarity is coming down and organic solidarity is going up. Okay, this diagram should have been there in your answer. Otherwise, it's a good answer. Around 6 marks you'll get for this. Now the bigger questions. Explain how Weber's characterization of capitalism is different from those of Marx. Okay, so capitalism according to Weber and Marx. So you need to explain how it is different. See, what you have written here is what is Weber's theory of capitalism and then what is Marx's theory of capitalism, Marx's understanding of capitalism. If the question is something like this, explain Marx and Weber's theories of capitalism, then it would have been a very good answer. But the question here is how it is different. So in each and every line you have to mention about the difference. For example, Weber is talking about micro, Marx is talking about macro. Weber is talking about individual, Marx is talking about society, right? Weber is not giving any solutions, Marx is giving solutions in the form of communism. And the most important point that you need to establish here is, see, if there is a question on capitalism to compare Marx and Weber, the main thread that you need to pick is actually the reverse relationship. What Marx says is, it is a capitalism which created religion. Economic infrastructure shapes the superstructure. Religion is part of superstructure. So economic infrastructure shaped this religion, which in turn will help in the functioning of economic infrastructure. That means capitalism created religion, so that religion will help in the functioning of capitalism. Marx said religion is the opium of masses, right? Religion is the heart of heartless world, soul of soulless condition. It is the opium of masses. So that is what Marx said, right? Because you suffer maximum in this world, you will get heaven in the next world. That is what religion says, right? So people are ready to suffer in this world, and people are ready to go to work, and they are ready to work in inhuman working condition with less wages. They are ready to suffer maximum. This is actually imposed by the religion. Okay, so that is what Marx says, capitalism created religion. But on the other hand, what Weber says, it is a religion which created capitalism, and that is what is theory of Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism. The Protestant ethic led to capitalism, right? And he made a comparative analysis. You have written all this comparative analysis, but this thread is what you should have taken, and this is the difference. This reverse relationship should have been established clearly, but that I cannot see here. What is capitalism according to Weber and what is capitalism according to Marx is what I can see all here. There is no differences which is written here. So actually you have written a lot, but nothing for the question which is asked, right? Out of 20 you will get hardly 6-7 marks. You'll be in a very disadvantageous position if you miss this kind of questions. Next is Verstehen. So you just have written what is Verstehen. It is comprehending. Then you have written the two methods: direct observational understanding and the explanatory understanding, right? You should have written the steps which is related to Verstehen. Weber is giving some steps to be followed so that you can ensure objectivity while conducting the research, right? So that step should have mentioned. And then you should never forget to write the limitations. Even though it is not asked, see in the first question, ideal types and its limitation. Even if limitations were not asked in the question, if the question was simply about ideal types, still you have to write the limitations. Okay, but at that time, in that question, even though ideal types and limitations were asked, but still you are only writing about ideal types. But even though it is not asked, you have to write it. So here, Verstehen, even if the limitations are not asked, you are supposed to write it. The most important limitation or the criticism that we can use is Weber himself never used this method. Although he gave this method, in none of his studies he used this method. So that question is a practical applicability. Then Verstehen is nothing more than comprehension. So is it a new method itself is a question. More than that, when you're comprehending, there is a lot of possibilities of subjectivity. So you cannot consider this as an objective method. Okay, so all these are the criticism which you should have mentioned here. Without that, the answer is not complete. This 10-mark question, hardly you will get 2-3 marks just because you have explained what is Verstehen. But these questions you should have fetched 70 to 80% you'll get this kind of questions. All the 10 markers should be scored really well because you have very limited content to write and all the content you can write properly. Analyze Marxian concept of historical materialism as a critique of Hegelian dialectic. See, in the previous question in capitalism, you were supposed to compare Weber and Marx, right? But what you have done is you have actually talked about Marx and then Weber. There was no comparison. Here also almost similar line the question is asked. But what you have written here is you just talked about what is dialectical idealism. That means Hegelian concept. And then you're talking about dialectical materialism or historical materialism, that theory. But again, there is no comparison. You're not writing how it is a criticism, how Marxian theory of historical materialism as a critique to Hegelian idealism, that you are not mentioned here. So there I have told you the thread, that is a reverse relationship. Here also it is exactly the same thing, almost the same. See what Hegel says. You have written about this thesis, synthesis and all those things is written here. Now what Hegel says is, there are dialectics, right? Dialectics means change. When there is a contradiction, there will be change. The dialectics is there, but dialectics, this change is because of ideas. The ideas generated in the minds of individual create changes in society, and that's what social change. So he is explaining social change in terms of ideas. Ideas create social change. Just like Facebook, how social change happen, right? All these are ideas in the mind of individual that create social change. That is what dialectical idealism. And in that case, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, both of them together will form synthesis. Then that synthesis will act as a thesis. Then antithesis will. All these are correct, but you're just explaining what is this Hegelian concept. But that is not what required here. You need to write that comparison or that criticism. How is it different? Now, Hegel says it is the ideas which create change. What Marx says? Marx says it is not ideas. It is rather the change in material conditions which create social changes, right? So dialectical idealism changed to dialectical materialism. The changes are not because of ideas, but because of material conditions. Material conditions are changing. What do you mean by material conditions? It is the economic infrastructure. What are the part of economic infrastructure? FOP and ROP. So forces of production and relation of production is changing. So that means economic infrastructure is changing. That will lead to changes in superstructure. And ideas, the way you think, the beliefs, practices, religion, education, culture, and all those things are coming under superstructure. So if economic infrastructure changes, that means if material conditions are changing, automatically the ideas also will change. So the prime reason for Marx is actually change in material condition. Because ideas are not part of economic infrastructure. Ideas are part of superstructure, which is actually defined and shaped by economic infrastructure. Okay, so that is a reverse relationship which you need to establish here. But I can't see that here. I can't see that as the most important criticism. But if you ask me, economic infrastructure, how it changes, basically because of change in force of production. How new force of production comes, it is because of ideas. Then who's correct? Maybe Hegel is more correct. But whatever it is, we have to write as a critique to Hegel. Again, there's 20 mark. Out of this, you'll get 6-7 marks only. Just because you are not able to establish that relation. You have written what is this theory. But I hope you understood that's not enough. The theory is not what they're asking. If they're asking about this theory, then you would have got around 14, 15 mark. You have written the theory in a very good way. But that is not what they're asking. Okay? So without answering to what they've asked specifically, you won't get anything. You are writing this 4 pages for this 20 mark, you're just wasting time. Instead, you would have attempted two 10 mark questions and you would have got the same mark. Differences and similarities between Marx's theory of alienation and Durkheim's theory of anomie. That question is missing. That is not answered, okay? So next one you have attempted, no? Explain concept of social change, critically examine the contribution of Marx's theory of social change. Okay. Karl Popper, good reductionist. Dahrendorf, okay. Simmel, Coser, all these are okay. See, the criticism you have written well. But what is the question? What do you mean? What is the question? Question was explain the concept of social change. That's the first part. Then critically examine the contribution of Marx's theory of social change. What you have answered here is only the second part. You have critically examined Marx's theory of social change. You're starting with Marx's theory of social change, right? You're talking about force of production, you're talking about relation of production, then you're talking about different modes of production, you're talking about primitive communism, all these things is done. So you're actually talking about Marx's theory of social change, and then you are critically evaluating. The criticism is also written with the thinkers, and this part is done. Second part is done very well. But what is the first part? Explain the concept of social change that you haven't mentioned. Actually, if you would have done that part well, you would have got more mark than the second part, because there is a huge scope. When the question is generally asked about explain the concept of social change, you have huge scope to write that particular part, because you can talk about Durkheim concept of social change in terms of mechanical and organic solidarity. We can also talk about Parsons' idea of social change, that just before you have written moving equilibrium, right? You can talk in the form of moving equilibrium. You can also write about cybernetic hierarchy of control. You can talk about, in the 10th chapter, you're talking about a lot of thinkers, Andre Gunder Frank, Immanuel Wallerstein. All these people could have been mentioned here, and it would have been a very good answer. So the first part you should have mentioned about all the possible thinkers, explain the ideas of social change. Then the second part only you need to talk about Marx's idea of social change, and you need to critically evaluate. So the second part is done well here. First part is missing. So out of 20 mark, the 10 mark is directly missing, and rest of the 10 mark you may get around 70%, 7 marks. So out of this, out of 20, this question you will fetch 7 mark, because the second part I've done well. What is the next question? Methodologies adopted by Durkheim in his study of social change. It's actually a 10 marker. So the content wise, see, the problem here is you have written about rules of observation, rules of classification, rules of distinction, rules of explanation. What is this? These are the rules to study social facts. What they have asked, the question is methodologies used by Durkheim. So this is again not an answer to the question. You could have mentioned this, but you don't want to explain all those things. What you need to mention instead, you should have talked about comparative, you should have talked about indirect experiment. Okay, indirect experiment in his theory of religion. You should have also talked about statistical techniques in his theory of suicide. You should have mentioned about single variable, multivariate analysis again in his theory of suicide, right? So all these things should have been mentioned. And in general, his perspectives, functionalism, positivism, giving importance to macro, all these things should have come towards the end. And then social facts, the rules of studying social facts should also be mentioned in this answer. Then it would have been good. What you have written is just the rules of studying social facts, the 4 rules, and you have just explained it. You've never talked about indirect experiment, you've never talked about statistical techniques. You've discussed n number of times Durkheim theory of suicide as a classical exhibition of his demonstration of statistical techniques in sociology or quantitative methods in sociology. Okay, he wanted to consider sociology on the line similar to natural science, so he even said social facts to be considered as things, and I think that is one of the questions. We'll discuss that there. But this question, you will get around 2-3 marks only. Nothing related to the answer is written. Maybe just because the 4 rules are mentioned, maybe get 2-3 marks. Next is compare Marx and Durkheim with reference to division of labor. Starting is good. You used similarity between. Generally, students won't write the similarity between Durkheim and Marx because they are polar opposites, right? One of the most important similarity that you can say is they have used evolutionary perspective. Both Marx and Durkheim used evolutionary perspective. In his theory of mode of production, Marx is using evolutionary perspective from one stage to another, and Durkheim is also using evolutionary perspective from mechanical solidarity to organic solidarity. Apart from that, is there any similarity between them? Both of them are macro sociologists. Okay, that also you can mention somewhere. See, again, in this question, the most important point is missing. Otherwise, you have written many things about the division of labor according to Marx and Durkheim, but the thread here, just before we talked about Hegel and Marx and Weber, similarly, when it comes to division of labor, the comparison which will always ask us related to Marx and Durkheim. The thread here is, what Marx says, because of division of labor, you are facing alienation, right? Man is a creative humanism. He can create everything, but if you cannot express something in society as your own creativity, you are basically alienated. So because of division of labor, you cannot express your creativity, so you are alienated. Man is above all, homo faber, man the maker. That's what Marx says, right? On the other hand, when it comes to Durkheim, what Durkheim says is, if there is a division of labor, the individual is now free to decide on what you're going to do. So the individual is actually getting the much required autonomy to produce. That means you're getting more freedom. So more freedom means no alienation. So this is the reverse relationship. Just like in case of capitalism, reverse relationship between Marx and Weber, here when it comes to division of labor, again there is a reverse relationship when it comes to alienation. Division of labor, again you have written about division of labor of Durkheim a lot because you have studied that as a theory. But you haven't written about division of labor for Marx. Basically you need to talk about alienation. But that is not mentioned because you're not studying in terms of division of labor. That's what most of the students will do. So here, again, that most important part is missing. Okay, so Marx is saying division of labor is a dysfunction or it is alienating, whereas Durkheim is saying it is functional. Functional in two dimensions. Basically, one is division of labor is giving much required autonomy to produce. So you're getting freedom, you're not alienated. Secondly, it is also integrating society. Whereas Marx says it is dividing society, it is dividing the workers, it is dividing people from the fellow workers because work is compartmentalized. But that is not actually happening according to Durkheim. The reason is both are using different perspectives, right? One is using conflict perspective, the other is using functional perspective. So these differences should have been highlighted. That is actually a problem. You have the content, you're writing 4 pages in all the 200 20 more questions, but the problem is not to the question. Just social facts to be treated as things. Again, you should have started with the definition. What do you mean by social facts? Social facts are the ways of acting, thinking, and feeling which are endowed to individual and which are external to individual and are endowed with the power of coercion by the reason of which they control over him, right? So you basically need to talk about what is social facts. And then talk about, you have mentioned about the characteristics, that's good. But you don't want to explain characteristics. You can simply say externality, generality, independence, and constraint. These are the 4 characteristics. You can briefly also mention about the rules of studying social facts, rules of observation, rules of classification, rules of distinction, and rules of explanation. After that, in rules of observation, he is saying, when you're observing, you should consider social facts as things. He is saying it is very difficult, but it is not impossible to consider it as things. And he has given the concept of collective representation, right? And through that you can consider it as things. And you also need to mention Durkheim's stress or emphasis on considering social facts as things shows his concern towards objectivity. So he basically wants to make sociology on the line similar to natural sciences, so that concern is clearly visible when you're saying this. That is actually showing the... Why? Because when you're considering this as thing, you can quantify the social facts. When you can quantify social facts, you can use statistical techniques or quantitative methods directly from natural sciences. And Durkheim demonstrated that in his theories, right? But obviously, can you ever consider social facts as things? It is not possible, right? Because social facts means religion, family, and all those things. It is not possible. It is very difficult. We can, and what Weber says is, that is a criticism. You can use Weber to criticize. Social facts are not like pebbles in the beach to go and pick it easily. You can't do that, just like that. It is very difficult, okay? Next, examine relevance of Personian system, social system in the present society. This matrix should have been drawn properly. That interconnection, this interconnection should be there, okay? Through this interconnection is there. Okay, see, again, you have just written what is social system. relevance of Parsons' social system in present society is what they're asking. So where is the relevance here? I can't find any relevance here. You've just written about social system. You're talking about what is social system. You're defining social system. You're talking about the conditions. You're talking about two phases, mechanism, equilibrium phase. Cybernetic hierarchy of control also I've mentioned. But what is the relevance? The most important part is missing. So how will you write this? You should have said that the present society can be understood as a system which comprising different parts, right? Our society can be understood as a system which is again having adaptation, goal attainment, integration, latency needs in terms of economic system, political system, cultural system, fiduciary system, family systems, etc. So society is basically based on a lot of systems, and all the systems have to work properly. Then only the society can survive. So in that context, Parsons' theory of social system is very important. So you have to mention about, you have talked about this AGIL model, but you haven't mentioned about AGIL model of society. With that, you could have explained better. Otherwise, see, if the question is about social system, you would have got around 15 marks out of 20. Okay, but here, you have just written what is social system. Again, you'll get hardly 7 to 8 marks. So this is what actually happens. You write the answer, you think that you have written properly, you have written 4 pages and all the questions were familiar, but when the marks comes, exactly half of the mark that you expected will come in the paper. அடுத்தது, anomy is rooted in social structure. Explain with reference to Merton's contribution. This is an easy question, direct. Okay, you draw the table, goals and means. Anomy is a situation where there is a discrepancy between means and goals, right? Draw the table and explain who are conformist, who are ritualist, who are retreatist, who are rebellion and all these things, okay? But more than that, you need to mention some people who seem to be conformist, but actually they are deviant. For example, in innovator, when you take the case of a scientist who's trying to find new things, he's actually taking different routes. So he's violating the means, right? So a scientist who seemed to be a conformist is actually a deviant, as per Merton's theory. Similarly, a bureaucrat, he's a ritualist. He is excessively following the rules, but he is not realizing that he is not satisfying or achieving the goals. So he is missing the goals. The first person is missing the means, but he is achieving the goal, scientist. He is also a deviant. Second person who is satisfying the means but not reaching the goals is also a deviant. A teacher who is teaching without understanding the mindset of the student, he is also a deviant. Okay? But it's okay, whatever you have written is good. How Parsons modified over Weber in his theory of social action. See, first you define what is social action according to Weber. You know that. You would need to write 2 conditions. Then you explain what is the definition according to Parsons. You write the 4 conditions. Then tell how Parsons modified over Weber. Okay. Then you talked, and then at that time you can say, most importantly, Weber is only considering the internal dimensions, the meanings attached by the actor. That is only the motivations of the individual. But when it comes to Parsons, he is considering both micro and macro. That is an integrated approach. He is considering motivational orientation, that is the individual's meanings, at the same time value orientation, that is the values from the society. So both have been given preferences. So there is nothing which is missing in Parsons. That is how he modified over Weber. And when it comes to the ideal types, you need to also talk about ideal types of social action for Weber and Parsons. Weber is talking about 4 ideal types: traditional action, affective action, Zweck rational action, Wert rational action. On the other hand, Parsons is talking about 3 ideal types: instrumental action, moral action, and affective action, or expressive action, right? Expressive action. So what is instrumental action? Instrumental action is similar to Wert rational, this one, Zweck rational action. See, Parsons' expressive action is similar to affective action of Weber. That comparison is required. Parsons' moral action is related to Wert rational and traditional action of Weber. Parsons' instrumental action is related to the Zweck rational action of Weber. So that comparison should have been there, then this answer is good. Okay, but otherwise also, it's okay. 4 marks. Analyze manifest and latent functions of security of tenure of bureaucrats in the light of Merton's theory. You need to write what is manifest function, what is latent function. Manifest functions are the subjective predispositions, latent functions are the objective consequences, that is the unintended outcomes, okay? Okay, manifest function you have written is correct, but latent function what you have written is actually the dysfunctions. He can take bribe from wealthy person, and these are dysfunctions. Latent functions are functions which are hidden. So you should have written function. Apart from that, even though the question is asked about manifest and latent functions, you have to write about manifest and latent dysfunctions also. This should have come in the dysfunctional part, okay? That also you need to mention here. Okay, 4 marks you'll get for this. What is the next question? How can we use reference group theory to understand fashion in society? Okay, you can talk about Bollywood style, Salman Khan, Katrina Kaif, their dressing, their eating styles, the bodybuilding. Okay, all these are, people consider them as reference group, right? And they try to imitate them. The positive reference group, there are negative reference group, right? All these things has to be there, but whatever is written is okay. So you're getting around 85. 125 plus is what expected, at least in the beginning. And when it comes to actual exam, 150 plus is actually expected, because if you want to score 300, that if you want to cross that, 160, 170 should be there in paper 1. Paper 2, you don't know what is going to happen, right? So paper 1 is in your hand, so 170 is your target, but 150 you must achieve. But here it is 85, means it's half of it, okay? So do one thing, one more time you write the thinkers test. I'll give you another set of question paper. Write that and try to get 125, okay? Then we can stop it and we can do it after prelims. What is the problem here? The main problem is you are not writing to the answer. You have the content, you know everything. The problem is you need to write more. Then it can be solved easily. Okay, write more. See the question, underline the key word in the question. If it is critically analyze, go for critically analyze. If it is compare, write the comparison. Just don't write the theory. Okay? Okay.